listening to the Fusion Patrol podcast. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Fusion Patrol. I'm Eugene.
I'm Ben.
And tonight we are going to be looking at another episode of the classic, cult, British, science fiction-ish TV series, Doomwatch. Tonight, the episode, Reentry Prohibited.
Forbidden.
Reentry Forbidden. Either way, it sounds like a double entendre from a classic Bond film.
I suppose it does.
In any case, this was a cheery little episode concerning a limey astronaut. I didn't call him that. The guys from NASA did.
Yeah.
And
I was kind of surprised at that.
And it's really the story of it's a continuing story of an astronaut.
It's a feel-good story of a man with mental illness.
Yes, it's a very bright and cheerful episode. Basically, just to give you the quick rundown on it, we start the show off. The Americans have launched an atomic-fueled spacecraft into orbit, Sunfire One, and it's a 3-man crew, 2 of which are stalwart Americans who would never make mistakes, and one's a British astronaut who quite clearly makes a human error in working the equipment, which nearly causes the spacecraft to crash or be destroyed and spread 300 miles worth of radioactive fuel all over the coast of England. Which really has nothing much to do with the story exactly. And then the rest of the story is really about what went wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And why. And why is Doomwatch brought into this? Is it because of the atomic potential nuclear disaster? No.
No, and that would have been my first guess, and it wasn't.
No, it's because Quist is a former teacher of the limey astronaut.
Named Dick Larch.
Dick. I've never heard of a British person named Dick. Richard?
Yes, I would agree with you. I've never heard a Brit called by that nickname before.
Sobriquet. Yes, in fact, the first time they called him that, I assumed that they were talking about one of the Americans.
Yeah.
Because that's
exactly.
kind of like a stereotypical British version of an American name. You know, there's certain names that they like to give, particularly in the 70s for American. Dick is one of them, and I don't know. Anyway, so what'd you think of the episode as a whole?
Well, as a whole, I mean, it was different in that I'd read what the synopsis was. I walked into it with certain expectations. It's not that the expectations were not met. You know, that would sort of imply that it did not measure up to the imaginary standard bar that I had set mentally. It just that it took turns, or it took a few turns that I hadn't expected, and I had to keep playing scenes over again because I kept kind of wondering where the story was going, which in a way, in this particular case, I thought was a good thing. It had me guessing. I rather enjoyed it, and despite the fact that the episode or the ending was
happy.
Well, I was thinking back to past Doomwatch episodes, and I thought, yeah, this one's just about as cheery as all the rest.
Yeah, it's fit. I gotta say, I agree with everything you said there, except that I don't know. I just feel like the episode didn't work. And, the space sequences, and which, are brilliantly filmed in 1970s BBC. So, and that's actually, I'm not kidding. I'm not busting on them of that. They look just exactly like the space scenes from Ambassadors of Death and Doctor Who, and they had 3 guys 70s, in a small capsule. I mean,
they had that 70s BBC quality to it.
Yeah, and that was all right. And then when he came back to Earth, or when the astronauts did make it back to Earth, they because of the pilot error, which they were not. This guy wasn't actually the pilot, but because of human error, the craft came down close to England. And so the British Navy recovered them and brought them to England rather than taking them to America as they normally would. And so the craft was recovered and brought to England, and they did their forensic analysis at a British military base. and that gave them the opportunity to set the astronauts and crew in Britain for a month or so that we could have our interaction with the Doomwatch folks. But, there's a subplot-ish of the astronaut being jealous of his wife.
Well, I don't know if I would call it a subplot. It's more of a thread that is connected to what really is a story. And I can sort of understand some of your hesitation because as we've observed with past Doomwatch episodes, and you alluded to it a little earlier, the Doomwatch, they're always brought on because there is some real catastrophe. That's a direct threat to Earth in some way. And the radioactive element, pardon the pun, in this story kind of took a back seat. It really was more about this one British astronaut. It was really all about him. And that was the reason the Doomwatch people were brought in, not because of their expertise in dealing with, intelligent mice or a plastic eating bacteria. No, they were brought in because Quist has his personal relationship to Dick Larch. I think he said Dick was his student.
Yeah. And it's 100% political.
Yes.
Because NASA actually doesn't really want to be in a position where they have to point a finger at a Brit and say, the British astronaut is who screwed this up. They want to find out who did it, but it's a minefield for them. And it would be much better if the British found out that the Brit was the guy that screwed up, which is why they want Quist to do it.
Because Quist also, we meet a psychologist early on.
What nationality was he supposed to be?
German, I think.
It was a little different, whatever his accent was supposed to be.
It was a little strange, but I think he was supposed to be German. Anyway, he approaches Quist, and he's the one who reveals that Quist sort of recommended Dick for this program, although Quist sort of seems to deny that.
Well, Rich said the same thing, and Quist denied it. Earlier, Rich said, you'd think about the guy that you recommended, and he said, no, I didn't recommend him. NASA recommended and asked me for references.
References.
Yeah. Which is odd. What was that about? Why did Quist what was so important that they had to convey that to the audience? That Quist, I did not recommend this guy. Does that mean Quist already had reservations about him? Because if so, we never really got that from this story.
Quist has always struck me as this jackass. I think that's, yes, sort of, but I think it's more of this ongoing character element to him that he's always, he is the perpetual pessimist.
Yeah.
He always looks at things in a negative point of view, even his own actions, which he does a lot in this episode. He's very self-recriminating with a lot of the things that he says and does.
True. Very true. But I didn't feel like it gelled. So for example, if we don't want to call it a subplot, the plot point of the astronaut's jealousy. It isn't really, it is important because it's part of his paranoid breakdown. He's paranoid his wife.
It's a symptom.
And then there's his accusation, apparently of the other astronauts of being the ones that, caused the problem. We don't even see that.
No, we don't see that. We only hear about it. And when it's finally mentioned, I had to keep thinking, did I miss something?
Right. It felt like it was
that
missing.
was a little odd.
And so you're wondering, is are they sprinkling clues for us to know that he's paranoid, or are they not sprinkling clues, or is that only something that the Doomwatch team sees, and that's why we're the only ones that get to see that until the wife reveals? It just really wasn't very clear to me about that.
It was vague, and I don't know if this was a nature of the broadcast, but it did seem to, and I could see how this could also affect the enjoyment of the episode. It seemed to be a little herky-jerky in its storytelling.
Yeah.
That seemed to do some jumps. I was kind of surprised at one point to all of a sudden see Dick in in some office room on Earth as he's undergoing. He's in the middle of debriefing, of being debriefed, and it's like, well, where the heck did that? What? Wow.
Okay, come on. They had the debriefing joke. I mean, have you ever actually seen a TV show where they actually did the debriefing joke? Where the wife was like, kept laughing every time he said debriefing, or when she tried to say debriefing.
That was weird.
That's such a funny joke. I just can't. Yeah. Anyway, it's herky jerky. It's disconnected. Frankly, it rambles. The episode rambles on. I'm like, okay. And then another guy comes to see Quist, and then Quist calls him in, and then they get him over there, and then they have a little office party. Frankly, I thought the whole jealousy angle was just so that Ridge could, nail the guy's wife. Frankly, I mean, I thought that was fait accompli when this episode started. And which does not say much for my opinion of Mr. Ridge's amours, but then on the other hand, he really lived up to it. I mean, he didn't as far as we know, but I mean, you get to that point where they say, well, her husband's very jealous, and his response is a very callous, well, you show me a jealous husband and I'll show you a wife that's not satisfied. Right. Something to that effect. And then the girl, the secretary says something, oh, you cheeky bugger, or something like that. I don't think he slapped her butt when he did it, but he definitely told her to shut up. I mean, it was he was at his top sexist 70s form at that point. And
he was really living up to his character. There's no question about it.
He was. And, ignoring the ending, let's talk a little bit about, we mentioned the German. Of course, the head guy for the Americans is none other than General Henderson from UFO, playing the spiky eyebrowed American general.
For NASA, I guess it's supposed to be NASA.
He plays heads of space guys organizations. He also is involved in the political football of not wanting to have to put the finger on the British. And they conduct a thorough investigation. And finally, in the end, without 100% proof, they're not willing to say that it's human error, which clears Dick to go back in space again in the future.
Which I have to admit, I did think that was suspicious. Now, granted, it was talked about in the episode, and apparently there was supposed to be 3 more missions following this first Sunfire mission, of which Dick was supposed to be scheduled with that crew on the last of those 3.
It would have been on Sunfire 4.
Yeah, it would have been Sunfire 4, because Sunfires 2 and 3 were going to be manned by 2 different crews. But because of scheduling problems, it wasn't able to work.
So, somebody had gastrointestinal problems on one of the teams. So
the crew for Sunfire 1 got bumped up to do Sunfire 2. I found that a little... It kind of stretched plausibility a little bit.
Yeah, it was. If you think about it, though, it was at least a month or 2 or so. I mean, yeah, I give him several months. It was kind of hard to tell how much time really had elapsed there. But I thought it was interesting when she said, "Oh yeah, my husband's going up, now," and Quist had basically cleared him. I mean, again, it's one of those things. Like, he didn't want to condemn him.
It wasn't that Quist wanted to clear him. Quist wanted to wash his hands of that situation. He hated because, okay, so for the viewers, or for our listeners at home, the German, I'm guessing, psychologist, in an effort to try and maintain some kind of diplomacy, unofficially yet I guess unofficially, goes to Quist and says, "We really know, it'd be great if you could talk to him, find out what's going on, because my training suggests that there's something off." And Quist agrees to it on this ruse that, I suppose because he's something of a celebrity now, I can bring him in and do some work here in our office. And it's some BS experiment that has to do with physiology. So he brings him in, and like every 5 minutes, Quist is going outside, and he's just dumping on Ridge about how much he hates doing this. And then finally he just says, "You know what? I'm not doing it anymore." I can't. I'm going to tell him the truth. I'm going to cut him loose, and I'm going to give him back to the Americans because he's their problem.
But so that raises a question of personal responsibility, because Quist is all about the fact that, he does Doomwatch because he feels personal responsibility for making the atomic bomb or being part of the team that made the atomic bomb. But here is a situation where, yeah, you're right. Quist seems to be trying to wash his hands of it because he finds the whole thing distasteful. But when the wife tells him, and Ridge says something to this effect too. He says, well, you've salved your conscience or something like that, because he's not going to go up for another two or three missions. And when the wife comes in and says, he's up, he's going to be launching any time now, you can tell that Quist is suddenly upset. And that, to me, says Quist knew that guy shouldn't go up in a spaceship, and he didn't say anything to stop it. And that makes him personally responsible. That's right.
Yeah.
And so I kind of thought that was the theme they were going for a little bit in this episode, but there were too many people. The psychiatrist didn't want to say it. NASA didn't want to say it. Nobody wanted to come out and point the finger and say, human error, had to be you. You're at fault. And we, the viewers, have been treated to the fact that very, very clearly it was either human error or it was deliberate malfeasance on his part, because they're reading off the numbers, and
you see
he's
him
very exaggeratingly pressing the wrong ones.
Right. And looking very nervously the entire time as he's doing it.
Yeah, he did kind of look, after he did that, he kind of looked like, oops, did I make a mistake? Well, I'm just going to clear that up. And, I couldn't tell, because subsequently it seems like it was a genuine mistake.
And then they are constantly grilling him, because at first they have absolutely no evidence that it is an equipment failure. So they keep coming back to, well, it's got to be human.
Mm-hmm.
And Dick just gets very defensive on this. He appears to have all the evidence of suffering from some sort of persecution complex, which is part of paranoid schizophrenia. So maybe that's one of the reasons why people decided to kind of leave well enough alone. And they do also mention a little later in the episode, I think it's the wife who says it, well, NASA, they've got all these tests to be able to determine, and all these simulations about how a person is going to operate. And of course, I kept thinking, yeah, well, they got all these tests for how a person is going to operate when they're in regular gravity. But the story poses the idea that a phobia of weightlessness is a classic symptom of paranoid schizophrenia. That was a new one to me, but okay, I'll for the sake of the story, I'll go along with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one seemed kind of, I don't want to feel weightless. It's like, okay, I could see how astronauts might get that, but I'd have a hard time prior to the space age thinking that a paranoid schizophrenic would be afraid of weightlessness, since it's something that really is not. Anyway, we'll take it as read that's a.
And I do personally find it hard to believe that I'm talking myself out of this episode now, and I'm really depressed about it because I did enjoy it, but I did have a problem with, even if they couldn't test him in a weightless environment, there must be some highly advanced psychological tests that can be run on a person to detect even the seeds of paranoid schizophrenia. I mean, I tell you, that sleazy doctor who works for Shadow, he would have detected this in 2 seconds flat.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. He'd have never gotten past the computer datalization of his personality. No, absolutely not. General Henderson really slipped up on this one before he went to work for Shadow.
Yeah.
So,
although maybe this is why he's so hard on Straker now. I was trying to draw the connections too between the two shows.
It could be. It could be. So, let's see, what else? We got any other anyway, basically he gets up into the spacecraft, and then this is where, the wife talks to Quist and then mentions the fact that he was blaming the other guys, and suddenly all the pieces fall together and they realize, wait, he's a paranoid schizophrenic. We need to get on the blower and tell him to contact the pilot only and warn him that guy is unstable.
And this was one, in terms of technical errors within the confines of the story, this one is just a lemon.
Which one?
This one was huge. The diverted communique.
for starters, I thought it worked pretty well to begin with because Quist goes to the British tracking station and he gets put through to Houston, as they call it, and says, this is Professor Quist. Dick Clark is Dick Lake, Dick
Larch.
I can't believe you said that.
God. My Freudian slip is showing.
Is a paranoid schizophrenic and you need to notify the pilot without notifying Dick that what the situation is. And I think it's funny that the guy at NASA comes back and he says, GBUK station, can you please confirm the message you just sent at 17:35 hours?
And instead of saying confirm, Quist gets on the horn again and
says it again.
And he literally repeats it. And unfortunately, that gets sent, at least a bit of it gets sent up to the command capsule.
Right, because they had to, because we couldn't understand you, let's switch channels, and somehow they cross-patched the channels, and that gets beamed up to the station, to the orbiting station.
And they all hear it.
We think so.
Oh, I see from their faces.
I think they all hear it. But
yeah, it's pretty clear they all got it.
And yet the people in the ground who also can see the faces do you think only the captain heard that?
No. They
don't know.
Heard it.
Well, I find it hard to believe that there's actually a way for them to communicate with the captain only.
Well, that was the one thing I thought that was kind of strange too. How do you pull that one off?
So the British guy now launches himself onto basically, I better take command of this capsule and I'll get us down okay. And
all during the time when they're trying to confirm coordinates to hit that reentry corridor, which is supposed to be very narrow.
Exactly the same thing at time that he had his breakdown before, basically. Because it was doing the whole reentry coordinate thing that he screwed up, and then this is the same time. And so they missed their reordinate, they missed their
They start to go in, but they're going in a wrong angle and they have to abort, otherwise they'll burn up.
And in the good old days, aborting a mission like that meant you ain't never coming back.
You're never coming back.
And the American pilot, before the signal gives out, gives a little touching speech, because that's the way our boys in NASA are, about how it's his fault and that Dick is his good friend.
And people should not be measured by how they die, but rather how they live, or something along those lines.
Yeah. And then everyone's kind of sad and the wife's crying because apparently she may actually be fond of her husband and not cheating on him, but it's hard to tell.
We do get the feeling that she was being, for the most part, she was being honorable in her marriage. But I think she just, because that paranoid schizophrenia was really beginning to manifest within Dick in terms of how he was treating his wife. I think she started to rebel a little bit because she's given an opportunity to get a tour of the Doomwatch facilities with Toby and Ridge escorting her all around. And she did that. She agreed to that deliberately just to kind of say, I'm a little tired of you being so bullying and pushy.
I just realized that joke the stupid joke's even worse than I thought. The debrief joke, because it's not just that. They're debriefing Dick.
Oh, dear God.
It's terrible. They could not possibly have not known that joke was there to be had. No wonder the wife snickered. Anyhow, so yeah, I thought it was a very dramatic ending, and I thought it was the whole nuclear fuel thing was kind of washed away. And there is actually an interesting comment at the beginning of the episode where Quist and Ridge are talking about the potential of that atomic material coming down. And Ridge is kind of like, and you're just going to go to the minister and, take care of that. And basically Quist says, I know they're not going to do anything about this. There's no way we're going to stop them from doing this. Not going to happen. But, that's my job and I'm going to go tell them. But I know it's not going to make any difference. So it's a very real practical aspect of it, knowing that, he has no control over what the Americans do. And then that's basically it with the atomic fuel thing.
That is. We only hear it in reference just a couple more times, but that's it. In terms of any kind of threat that this radioactive fuel or any potential for radioactive fallout could occur. It's at the beginning of this episode, and it's dealt with, and that's over. And we never hear about it again, except that it is part of the Sunfire experiments to see, because these are test missions. They just launch, orbit like 4 or 5 times, and then come back, and it's all to see, can we have nuclear powered rocket ships for space travel?
Let me ask this question, because then that makes this kind of an odd episode. About the obvious thing is the atomic energy is the component that would make you think of Doomwatch. But do you think in some grander scale that perhaps doesn't work as clearly as perhaps it should, that really the whole point behind this story is that no matter how great the precautions and the preparations and whatnot, that human error can still potentially lead to disaster. So that really the whole episode is kind of setting up, saying, the purpose of Doomwatch in other locations, it still comes down to human error. Or it can come down to human
pretty
error.
much every episode.
Culpability. This man's blameless. I mean,
Yeah.
Dick is blameless. He's sick. And he's been put in a situation that makes him sicker. But
the culpability, but the human error lies in that someone should have detected this and not have sent him up in the first place.
But it's also human error on his part. These things just happen. And so no matter how well prepared you are, there's still that human error. That's it. It's no matter how well prepared you are. Most of the episodes of Doomwatch so far are talking about people who have not done what they needed to do to be
They made
safe.
errors in judgment,
right,
regarding whatever scientific project that they were working on. Being again, Toby opening up a container that had a plastic, a plastic eater bug in there, or the woman who was training.
That's not
genetically
fault,
breeding. No.
Well, I mean, the point on that one was that the woman who went in with the secretary's 10, because he shouldn't have, they violated security procedure to get into so those things are all, you could call them human error, but they're really human.
Well, I wouldn't call them human error. They're errors in judgment.
Whereas this one is just literally,
I think it's a difference, where there was just a human mistake.
Because they're very painstaking in this episode to portray NASA, for the most part, as being very meticulously going over this thing. NASA comes off as a little bit, politically doesn't want this football. And the psychiatrist himself comes off a little bit bad. But by and large, NASA comes out of this thing looking like consummate professionals for the most part. I mean, disassembling the craft, checking every part, detailed debriefings. I mean, they're following the protocol.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter how good your protocol is, there's still that guy's brain flips a bit and pushes the wrong button and kind of aspect to it. So I kind of halfway thought that's what they were getting at, was to show you, it's not just people doing wrong things, expedient things. It's also just, forget it. Doesn't matter. You're gonna screw it up eventually. And that's why we can't have nice things like atomic energy.
Well, I think it was Doomwatch does have this tendency to sort of
preach.
Well, yeah, they preach about how man is we're just not any good. We are technologically clumsy. We are reckless. We are self-destructive, and we are stupid.
You have to wonder what they measure that against.
They measure it against Quist, or at least Quist measures it against whatever imaginary scale he has. But it's all in his head. And this episode again does that. It sort of goes to show that humans, you can't detect these things, so therefore you should not be going out into space. I mean, you're lucky in that you didn't have a radioactive problem that came spilling back down to Earth. But no, instead you've got 3 astronauts whose ship bounced off the skin of the atmosphere and is now floating off into space, never to return.
It's funny. I don't know if we've mentioned this on the Doomwatch podcast before, but to me, this is normally is a huge turnoff in science fiction. To me, I don't like, generally speaking, I don't like science fiction programs that take that attitude.
I generally don't
Wherever
either.
we're going to go, man's going to screw it up. It doesn't matter what we do. We don't know what we're doing. We can't build a dam. We'll screw something up. We can't make a spaceship. We'll destroy another planet. We can't do this. We can't do that because
We are
mankind's
incapable of achieving
incompetent.
anything good.
And whereas you might take something like Star Trek and say that might be a little over simplified the other way, I generally favor the hopeful and optimistic view.
I do too.
Looking towards the future.
And yet, I enjoy this series.
It really is the epitome of we're going to screw up. I think, it's like watching a traffic accident, kind of. People do it. It's like, how can they screw up the world in this episode? Kind of thing. I don't know. Well, I don't know. I think I haven't got anything else to say about this.
Well, I got just one other thing, and that's at the beginning of the episode, the psychologist,
the psychotic psychologist,
and Dick's wife, they are in some sort of waiting room watching the mission on what I guess is supposed to be some sort of closed circuit TV.
Mm-hmm.
And the psychologist gets on the phone, and I guess it's some sort of observation that his pulse rate was high. And he basically says, I'm a psychologist, not a heart specialist. But of course, the moment I heard that, I just wanted to say, damn it, Jim, I'm a psychologist, not a heart specialist. I mean, it had almost that Bones McCoy.
Actually, there's something more about that now that you mention it, because then they went on to give him some BS acronym. His LGBT ratio or something was out of whack.
Yeah, it almost sounded like some kind of technobabble.
And he goes, oh, really? And looked kind of concerned. And then, okay, and hung up the phone. And then the wife goes, well, what's that?
Nothing to do with
it. It's just some jargony speak. But if that's the case, that occurred at the same moment he made the screw up.
Yep.
Psychiatrists suppress that because we never, ever hear word one about that to anyone. He never mentions it to Quist. He never mentions it to General Henderson. He never mentions it to the astronaut. No one. It's just gone.
Yeah, that's the only reference to it. And then it's never Well, he only mentions it one more time, or he alludes to that instance just one more time when he's having his first face-to-face meeting with Dick during a break in the debriefing, and basically says, your pulse rate was at 165.
Yeah, he mentions the pulse rate, but he doesn't mention is the other one, the one that made him look worried. No, the pulse rate he didn't care about, but whatever that ratio thing was that they gave,
which I have no idea what it was supposed to mean.
It didn't sound like anything to me either. But I mean, it was something, and that made him concerned. But that wasn't mentioned again. But right, he mentioned the heart rate, and yeah, it was up there. But he mentioned it, kind of in respect to the not failed but dangerous reentry, which it would expect the guy's heart rate to be probably a little bit up.
Mm-hmm.
So. Yeah, it just wasn't. I don't know. For me, it was a miss. It had some interesting ideas in it, and I liked him killing the astronauts off at the end.
I have to admit, I kind of like that too. I mean, as grim as that was, I did enjoy it.
I think they couldn't bring him back to Earth because of the nuclear fuel, so they're not going to burn up that way. They're just going to fly off into space, and perhaps the doctor will rescue them.
I'm trying to think if I've got anything else. This, and no, nothing really. And the only other thing that I thought was amusing, and that's something that you brought up, is General Henderson called him a limey.
Oh yeah,
which I thought was
the limey loused it up. That's what he said.
And the fact that there are a couple of things. There are two things, and actually this was one of them, and that is the portrayal of the Americans. Okay, so you had your stalwart American astronauts, but when you got to the NASA folk, I mean, okay, maybe they were very meticulous in their post-flight analysis, but their behavior was at times almost boorish. I did not care for seeing the general throw that throw limey out there. I mean, that's hardly a nice word. And I can only assume that to put that on a BBC program is to deliberately paint someone high up in NASA or something as being something of a bigot.
Well, 1970s Britain, they're still reeling over the loss of the empire.
Are we still kind of pining about the whole British crown and all that?
Yeah, I think that was probably a little bit of it. I think they were probably, feeling a little bit. I suspect. In fact, I'm reasonably sure that this is true. That there was a certain amount of resentment, and I won't say whose fault it was, but it's probably the Americans. Post World War II, because obviously we pulled their butts out of a fire, and we're the kind of people that would not let them forget that. So there's probably a little bit of that kind of self-important kind of attitude that rubs certain people the wrong way. And, being in debt to us until 2008 or whatever it was when they finally paid off their World War II debt didn't probably help too. So, I think that stage there's probably was some. I think that was probably just pure racism, if you can call it racism. Countryism.
It might have been.
They were trying to portray the Americans as being mean in the same way that they were portraying the Americans. And really,
well, the other thing was a little earlier. It's the first time we see the American military, and you have this one commanding. Okay. I don't know who this guy was. And he's sort of apologizing, and they kind of present him as being some Texas hick.
Well, all the people down there from Houston are Texas hicks.
We're sorry that we're kind of, we're intruding in your soup and all that, but, it looks like we're going to be in your way a little bit longer. We really apologize. And it's like, oh,
to be fair, a lot of the people at NASA do talk like that back then. And, it's much easier American accent to try to pull off for foreigner. The newscaster too, the American newscaster.
Oh, he was funny.
I know it's true, and I know it was that way, but it's still shocking to see a newscaster supposedly being taken seriously, sitting there on the set, smoking a cigarette.
He's kicking back. He is
back with a cigarette,
relaxed back with a cigarette as he's giving color commentary to what he's watching. Okay, I haven't seen that kind of attitude in a long time.
Yeah, that really put it.
That dated it.
It really did. The fact that everyone on Quist's team is sitting around smoking all the time, that's one thing. That's a result of the 70s, but I don't think it did on British television, but on American television, they started pulling smoking away before they started pulling it away in real life.
Yeah.
And so it was less common for you to see a news anchor or something, even when they were probably all chain smokers. They just kind of stopped doing that in the 70s. So I think, and it really looks out of place. Wow.
It felt kind of strange, but at the same time, there was something oddly familiar about it, which of course betrays my age.
So that's it for another exciting episode of Doomwatch. Sort of.
Yeah, I really don't have much else. The episode was pretty well, and that's pretty much it. You could kind of analyze and try to see if there's any go through the layers and see if there's any kind of message. And if there is one, it's more of Doomwatch preaching about how, humans and technology are just not a good mix.
Yeah, it is candy stuff. It's just all bad. Well, I hope you folks will join us again next time on another episode of Fusion Patrol.
Cheers.
You've been listening to the Fusion Patrol Podcast, a production of Lone Locust Productions. Join us on our new discussion forums at fusionpatrol.com. Find us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Username Fusion Patrol. You can also send us feedback by email at feedback@fusionpatrol.com. If you'd like to support Fusion Patrol, please leave us a review on iTunes. Fusion Patrol's theme music is Fight the Future by Amberwolf.